Referees allowed a professional athlete to be assaulted on national television. This is not only a bad look for the sport of basketball, this is a bad look for the red, white, and blue. And I'm here to tell you, bro, we're 250 years in. This is an anniversary year. Trump has to say something. I mean, we got international reporters talking about an American athlete being chokeslammed and pretty much assaulted on national television.
There's a video circulating right now that should terrify every executive in the WNBA. It's not dramatic. It's not edited with crazy music or special effects. It's just raw footage of what professional women's basketball looks like in 2024. A player gets hit with a forearm to the throat while she's already on the ground, defenseless, unable to protect herself, on national television, in front of thousands of witnesses and millions of viewers at home. The camera catches it perfectly. Everyone in the arena sees it. The announcers call it out. And then the referees do absolutely nothing. They don't blow the whistle. They don't eject the player. They don't even call a flagrant foul. Nothing happens. That video gets sent to international media outlets. Sky News Australia picks it up. Fox News runs segments on it. The conversation isn't about basketball anymore. It's about assault. It's about whether a professional sports league is capable of enforcing basic player safety. And when the WNBA finally does respond, they hand out a one-game suspension. One game. For what any reasonable person would call assault if it happened outside a basketball arena. And that's when you realize something has fundamentally broken in professional women's basketball. This isn't a story about fouls or physical play or the intensity of competition. This is a story about a league that got everything it ever wanted and is now actively destroying it because they're too afraid and too jealous to actually protect it.
The Indiana Fever veteran Sophie Cunningham, who went viral over her finger wagging over this latest incident, is trashing the WNBA for allowing her teammate, Caitlin Clark, to get targeted repeatedly. And then the league apparently really doing nothing to stop it.
This type of happens every single game to her, and the league and the refs do absolutely nothing about it. They're definitely targeting her, and the league and the refs do nothing to protect her.
The WNBA wants a pat on the back for what? Suspending Alyssa Thomas, who did the big fist to the neck thing, for one game. That's not going to stop anyone from doing anything against Clark.
Before Caitlin Clark showed up, the WNBA had a pretty significant problem. It wasn't a new problem. It wasn't something that just happened. It was a chronic, systemic, decades-long struggle for relevance that the league had been fighting since its inception. Let's be specific about what that looked like, because the numbers tell the entire story in a way that no amount of excuses can explain away. The WNBA had been around for 16 years. 16 full years of professional women's basketball. Thousands of games played. Some incredibly talented players on those rosters. Marketing campaigns. Television deals. Corporate sponsorships. All of it. And in those 16 years, how many times did they hit 1 million viewers for a single game? 0. Not once. Not even close. The league that was supposed to represent the pinnacle of women's professional basketball couldn't get a single game to reach 1 million viewers in 16 years of trying. Then Caitlin Clark arrived. Her rookie season. First year out of college. Still,
She's the best thing that ever happened to that league, and they're letting her get pummeled. What is going on here? Here to weigh in is Dan Dockich, host of Outkicks. Don't at me. Dan, why isn't the WNBA doing more to protect?
Oh, yes. Did you guys hear him? The WNBA referees are allowing Caitlin Clark to be assaulted. What did I just tell you? This is turning into an American problem, bro. And I'm telling you right now, they're going to try to say this is a race thing. This has nothing to do with race. This is a WNBA referee thing. Now, Dan Dockich is a person that has been very critical of Caitlin Clark this whole season. Stephanie White is his friend. Now, he's going to go on a rant about this.
Figuring out professional basketball. And suddenly the numbers changed completely. In her rookie year alone, the WNBA hit 1 million viewers 23 times. 23 times in a single season after 0 times in 16 years. And here's the part that makes it undeniable. She played in 20 of those 23 games. That's not coincidence. That's not media hype. That's not because the league suddenly got better at marketing. That's not because corporate sponsors suddenly cared more. That's not because international broadcasters suddenly discovered women's basketball. That's because one player showed up and changed the entire trajectory of the sport. The correlation isn't subtle or debatable. It's direct and measurable and impossible to dispute. But the 1 million viewer threshold is just the beginning. An economic analysis broke down exactly how much value Caitlin Clark brings to the WNBA. The number they came up with was staggering. She accounts for 25% of all revenue and economic activity in the entire league. 25%. Think about that for a second. There are 12 teams in the WNBA.
And other white lesbians. That's a big deal in the WNBA, and if anybody gets offended by what I'm saying, go sit in the corner. Tough, because that is absolute, and it started the moment Caitlin Clark got into the league. And you know what else? You know what, Laura? It's all cowardice. It's all hits from behind, like the first one, Kennedy Carter, a poke in the eye when she shoots a jump shot, going to the throat when she's already down. You know, it's one thing, you get a hard foul going to the rim, but these women have been cowards to Caitlin Clark, and it's ridiculous, but the WNBA doesn't do anything because they are afraid of the angry African-American lesbian woman who has dominated that league for years.
And there's suggestion that the mere Sophie's pointing at the young woman who put the fist down, her point was racist. So now you can't point when you see injustice. Only one side can point. I don't understand.
Each team has 12 to 15 players on the roster. That means there are roughly 150 professional women's basketball players in the league. One of them accounts for 1/4 of all the money that flows through the entire league. One player out of 150 is responsible for 1/4 of the league's entire economic value. That's not just being a good player. That's being a franchise-changing, league-transforming asset. And the impact didn't stop with television ratings. The new broadcast deal that the WNBA signed, that happened because of the attention Caitlin Clark brought to women's basketball. The corporate sponsors who suddenly wanted to get involved with the league, they're looking at those million-viewer games and thinking this is finally a property worth investing in. The merchandise sales that are breaking records. That's people buying Caitlin Clark jerseys and gear because she's finally made women's basketball cool to mainstream audiences. The attendance numbers that are skyrocketing across.
She's going to get physically pounded because women in sports don't want to see other women succeed to the level that Caitlin Clark is. There is so much pettiness, there is so much jealousy, but the undercurrent of the entire thing from the WNBA side and from the player side is racist and sexism. She's heterosexual, she's white. They can't stand that she has this popularity, and we've seen it for 3 years now.
Do you think she's going to stay in the league? The way she's being treated and why this is going?
Laura, I always think about it. I'm old enough to be her father, and if I were her father, we'd have to look at some options because this is absurd. I don't think the Fever, I'm in Indianapolis, I've been very critical of the Fever front office. They haven't protected her. They haven't done anything. They haven't been out there yelling and screaming. The league.
Teams are selling out because Caitlin Clark brought casual fans into arenas who never cared about women's basketball before. And here's the part that hits different. For the first time in league history, WNBA players are flying private instead of commercial. Think about what that means. For 25 years, professional women's basketball players were flying coach or at best business class, flying with layovers, eating airport food, dealing with all the normal indignities of commercial air travel. Then Caitlin Clark shows up, and suddenly the league is making enough money that players get to fly private. That's not a small thing. That's a massive quality-of-life improvement that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. Every single player in that league is making more money because of what Caitlin Clark did for the visibility of women's basketball. The salary increases, the better sponsorship opportunities, the improved broadcast deals, the merchandise revenue that gets distributed across the league. All of it traces back to her. She didn't just become a star. She transformed the entire
but the ongoing situation with WNBA league star Caitlin Clark is absolutely unbelievable. Now, Clark is basically the star of this league, and she has been on the receiving end of an increasing number of blatant fouls that, as far as I'm concerned, look a lot more like assault than legitimate gameplay. And others have been absolutely shocked by the poor treatment Caitlin Clark has received from her very own league, despite her being the big star, the big draw card that makes them all the money. They even excluded her from a recent anniversary poster. And now, her fellow player, Sophie Cunningham, has called out Caitlin's treatment, putting the league on blast.
Unfortunately, this type of happens every single game to her, and the league and the refs do absolutely nothing about it.
It's been a minute since you got fined on this podcast.
I have, but then like you see the videos of like literally kneeing and cheap shotting C in the throat. Like if she did that to any of our teammates, we'd be. But like they're definitely targeting her, and the league and the refs do nothing to protect her.
Entire economic engine of professional women's basketball. She took a league that was struggling to survive and turned it into a viable, profitable, growing business. She did something that no marketing executive, no commissioner, no corporate sponsor, and no player had been able to do in 25 years of the league's existence. She made people care. She made people watch. She made people spend money. She made women's basketball matter. So when the league allows her to get physically targeted repeatedly while doing essentially nothing to stop it, they're not just failing one player. They're actively destroying the thing that saved their entire league. They're killing the golden goose. They're sawing off the branch that they're sitting on. They're choosing short-term comfort over long-term survival. And the crazy part is that they know what they're doing. They understand the numbers. They understand how much Caitlin Clark is worth. They just don't care enough to actually protect her from the jealousy and resentment that's festering inside their own player base.
Years been playing. It's really unbelievable. You really can't come to any other conclusion. I'll tell Sophie Cunningham, Sophie, you say she's being targeted. You're a teammate. In the NBA, if they're targeting one of your players, someone's going to lose some teeth. I think you got to enforce the fact that you're going to pay a price if you target my player, the person on my team. Okay, I'll start with that. But there's no question that she is being targeted. Okay, just some outside of the actual montage of hits she's taken that we've all seen, she's the recipient of 17% of all flagrant fouls across the entire NBA. Almost 1 out of 5 flagrant fouls are committed on her, yet she's one of 150 players. That says it all. And what does it come down to? Yes, it is, well, race could absolutely be a component, and certainly there are WNBA players and analysts who have said, hey, why is this white girl getting all the attention? Well, why is she getting all the attention? I don't know. First of all, she is one of, if not the best player in the WNBA in only her 3rd year. She's 4th in points and 2nd in assists. James, we're clear. I didn't know that off the top of my head. I had to look it up because I've never seen more than 5 minutes of a WNBA game. I've tried.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
If you spend any amount of time watching WNBA games this season, you'll notice something that casual fans might miss, but anyone paying attention can't ignore. Caitlin Clark gets hit a lot. And not just hit in the way that happens in any physical sport where contact is part of the game. She gets targeted. She gets hit in ways that feel designed to intimidate, to injure, to send a message that she's not welcome in this league. But here's the thing about accusations without evidence. They're just opinions. They're just people saying what they see without any way to actually prove it's happening. Except the statistics prove it. The numbers don't lie. The numbers don't have an opinion about whether Caitlin Clark deserves to be successful. The numbers just show what's actually happening on the court. Caitlin Clark is the recipient of 17% of all flagrant fouls committed in the entire WNBA. Let that sink in for a second, because it's absolutely insane when you think about what it actually means. There are 144 players in the WNBA. 144 professional basketball players across 12 teams playing 40-game seasons. That's thousands of possessions, thousands of plays, thousands of opportunities for fouls to be called. And 17% of all flagrant fouls, the most serious infractions short of ejections, are being committed against one player. One player out of 144 is absorbing nearly 1 out of every 5 flagrant fouls in the entire league. If that's not targeting, then what would targeting actually look like? What would you need to see to convince someone that this is intentional? Sophie Cunningham, who plays on the same team as Caitlin, went public about it. And this is important because Sophie isn't some soft player complaining about physical play. She's been in this league for years. She knows what basketball looks like. She's not unfamiliar with contact and intensity. She's played in this league long enough to understand the difference between normal physical play and coordinated targeting. And what she said was this: it happens every single game, not occasionally. Not when things get heated. Not during rivalries or playoffs when intensity goes up. Every single game. Every single game that Caitlin Clark plays, she gets targeted. And the league and the refs do absolutely nothing about it. That's not an observation from someone who doesn't understand basketball. That's confirmation from an insider that what everyone watching can see is actually happening. The hits themselves have a pattern to them that makes it even more obvious that this is intentional. They're not accidental contact that results from both players going for a loose ball. They're not the result of miscommunication about positioning or spacing. These are deliberate acts. Hits from behind when Caitlin is focused on the play in front of her. Pokes in the eyes when she shoots a jump shot, when her hands are up and she's vulnerable. Forearms to the throat when she's already on the ground, when she's defenseless, when she can't protect herself. These aren't basketball plays. These aren't the result of 2 athletes competing at a high level. These are acts of intimidation and retaliation. These are hits designed to hurt, designed to send a message, designed to make playing basketball so unpleasant that maybe she'll just go away. The one that got international attention was the forearm to the throat. But that's just one example. There are compilations online now. YouTube channels dedicated to showing every hit that Caitlin Clark has taken throughout the season. And when you watch them in sequence, you start to see the deliberateness. You start to understand that this isn't random bad luck or coincidental contact. This is a coordinated effort by multiple players across multiple teams to make Caitlin Clark's life as difficult as possible. Kennedy Carter with the hip check. Alyssa Thomas with the forearm to the throat. Danai Carrington with various incidents that got called out on social media. These aren't isolated players making one bad decision. These are different players on different teams doing similar things, suggesting that there's either league-wide acceptance of this behavior or league-wide encouragement of it. And the referees are seeing it. They have to be seeing it. These aren't subtle plays that happen in the background of the action. These are obvious, flagrant fouls that any professional referee with eyes can see. The forearm to the throat happens in front of thousands of people. The cameras catch it. The announcers call it out. Everyone watching at home sees it. And the refs don't blow the whistle. They don't call a flagrant foul. They don't eject the player. They just let it happen. And that's when you realize that this isn't incompetence anymore. This is a choice. The referees are choosing not to protect Caitlin Clark. They're choosing to let these hits happen without consequences. They're enabling the targeting by refusing to call the fouls that would stop it. When you pull all of this together, the 17% statistic, Sophie Cunningham's confirmation that it happens every game, the pattern of coordinated hits from multiple players, the referee's refusal to call obvious fouls, you get a picture of systematic targeting that goes way beyond coincidence or the normal physical nature of basketball. This is a coordinated effort by the league, the players, and the officials to make Caitlin Clark's experience as a professional basketball player as difficult as possible. And the question everyone wants answered is why? What did she do to deserve this? Why is she being targeted? What's the actual motivation behind all of this? This is the part where people get uncomfortable, because it requires talking about things that the sports media usually avoids. It requires acknowledging uncomfortable truths about professional women's basketball and the culture that exists within the league. It requires looking at the why behind the targeting instead of just accepting that it's happening. And the honest answer is jealousy. Pure, unadulterated, competitive jealousy from established players, who thought they deserved the attention and the money and the cultural relevance that Caitlin Clark is getting. Before Caitlin showed up, the WNBA had a pretty specific hierarchy. There were players who had been around for years, players who had built the league, players who had carried it through difficult periods when nobody cared, players who had invested their careers in women's basketball when it was genuinely not profitable to do so. And those players expected that when the league finally got its moment, when women's basketball finally became relevant, that moment would belong to them. They expected to be the stars. They expected to be the ones getting the endorsement deals and the media attention and the cultural relevance. They expected that their years of sacrifice would finally pay off. And then a 22-year-old from Iowa showed up and took all of that. She became the star. She got the attention. She became the reason people cared about women's basketball. She became the golden goose. That's a bitter pill to swallow for players who have been in the league for a decade or more. Imagine being a player who's been grinding for 10 years, playing in near-empty arenas, flying commercial, making a fraction of what male players make, dealing with complete media indifference, and then watching a rookie come in and suddenly get everything you've been fighting for. Suddenly there are million-viewer games. Suddenly there are endorsement opportunities. Suddenly there's mainstream cultural relevance. Suddenly there's national media coverage. And it's all because of someone new, someone from outside, someone who didn't earn it the way you did, someone who doesn't deserve it the way you do. That's what breeds jealousy. That's what creates resentment. And it's not like Caitlin Clark fits neatly into the existing WNBA culture. That's part of the problem. She's heterosexual in a league where that's actually unusual among star players. The established stars of the WNBA tend to be gay women. Brittany Griner is gay. Jewel Lloyd is gay. Eric Augenboyle is in a same-sex relationship. The cultural center of women's basketball has always been oriented around the LGBTQ+ community. That's not a negative thing. It's just the reality of how the league developed. But Caitlin doesn't fit that mold. She's a heterosexual white woman from Iowa who plays a style of basketball that looks more like men's basketball than traditional women's basketball. She has mainstream appeal that reaches audiences that the WNBA has never been able to reach before. She's bringing straight people, casual sports fans, people who have never cared about women's basketball into the WNBA universe. And that feels like a threat to the established culture. There's also the element of how she got her attention. She didn't build her fan base the way other WNBA stars did. She didn't come up through the grassroots basketball community. She didn't build her reputation playing in tournaments and showcases and developing relationships with the basketball-obsessed community. She built her fan base by playing college basketball on national television and being exciting. She got mainstream attention because she was electric and young and different. She got casual fans interested in basketball because she was a crossover appeal in a way that most female athletes aren't. And some people in the basketball community see that as illegitimate. They see it as unfair. They see it as her getting attention for the wrong reasons instead of getting respect for her basketball talent. The evidence of this resentment isn't subtle. When the USA basketball team was announced, there was a "you can have her" comment directed at Caitlin. That comment came from an established WNBA player. Think about what that comment actually means. It's not just dismissing her. It's trying to make her unwelcome. It's trying to say that she doesn't belong in these spaces. It's trying to undermine her legitimacy. That's not competitive trash talk. That's personal resentment. Then there's the social media activity from other players. Danai Carrington posting things that were clearly directed at Caitlin. Angels Reese making comments about her. These aren't isolated incidents from players who have never met. This is a pattern from multiple players suggesting a coordinated effort to make Caitlin feel unwelcome. And then there's the pettiness. The league left Caitlin Clark off an anniversary poster celebrating the WNBA's 25th year and the growth of women's basketball. The same growth that she's directly responsible for creating. That's not an oversight. That's not a mistake. That's a deliberate decision to exclude her from the celebration of success that she made possible. Think about what that decision says. It says we're going to celebrate what women's basketball has become, but we're not going to acknowledge the person most responsible for it. We're going to celebrate the money and the attention and the relevance, but we're going to pretend that it has nothing to do with you. That's intentionally hurtful. That's deliberately disrespectful. That's the kind of thing that happens when an institution is trying to protect the ego of its established members by denying credit to the new person who's actually driving the success. Now here's where people want to say this is about race. Here's where they want to make it a story about race and gender and cultural conflict. And yes, those elements are present, but they're not the root cause. The root cause is something simpler and more universal: jealousy. The WNBA has no problem celebrating white players. Sue Bird was beloved. She was respected. She was treated like royalty. Breanna Stewart is one of the most respected players in the league, and she's white. Diana Taurasi, who's one of the greatest players in basketball history, is celebrated across the board. So it's not about Caitlyn being white. It's not about her gender. It's not fundamentally about race. What it's about is an outsider showing up and getting the attention that the established players thought belonged to them. But there's another element that makes this specifically hard to digest for some people, and that's about sexuality and heterosexuality in a league that's been built significantly by gay women. Brittany Griner is openly gay. She's been the face of the league for years. Brittany Griner paved a path for LGBTQ+ visibility in professional sports. She fought battles that made it easier for other gay women to be open about their identities. She used her platform to advocate for equality and visibility. And then Caitlyn Clark shows up, a heterosexual woman, and immediately becomes more famous, more marketable, more culturally relevant than Brittany Griner ever was. That's a hard pill to swallow for someone who sacrificed and fought battles and paved the way, only to see someone from outside the community come in and get bigger than you without having to fight any of those battles. It's complicated because Brittany Griner's story is one of courage and sacrifice. She deserves respect for what she's done for visibility. But it's also true that Caitlyn Clark is now the bigger star. She's now the one driving the league's growth. She's now the one getting the most attention. She's now the one whose jersey sells the most. And some people in the WNBA community find that genuinely difficult to accept. Some people resent her for it. Some people feel like it's unfair. Some people think that the attention and the money and the cultural relevance should have gone to someone else. Someone who earned it. Someone from within the community. Someone who fits the established narrative of women's basketball. The "you can have her" comment, the social media shots, the physical targeting on the court, all of it flows from that resentment. It's a way of trying to tell Caitlyn that she's not welcome. It's a way of trying to make her regret coming into the league. It's a way of punishing her for the crime of being more marketable and more interesting to mainstream audiences than the established stars. And the league, instead of shutting that down, is enabling it. Instead of saying this behavior is unacceptable, we're going to protect our player, the league is looking the other way. Instead of standing up for Caitlyn, the league is essentially telling other players that targeting her is okay as long as you don't make it too obvious. The WNBA league office had a choice. When they started seeing the pattern of targeting, when they started getting reports from officials about the physical play directed at Caitlyn Clark, when they started seeing the social media comments and hearing about the "you can have her" incident, when they saw Sophie Cunningham's public statement that this happens every single game, they had a choice about what to do with that information. They could have said this stops now. They could have issued directives to referees that any hit directed at Caitlyn Clark is going to be called. They could have suspended players immediately for flagrant fouls. They could have made it clear that targeting a player is unacceptable and would come with serious consequences. They could have protected their asset. They could have shown leadership. They chose not to do any of that. Instead, they handed out a 1-game suspension for a forearm to the throat. 1 game. For an act that any reasonable person would call assault if it happened outside a basketball arena. 1 game for an action that should have been a 3 to 5 game suspension minimum, possibly more. The message that sends to every other player in the league is crystal clear. Go ahead and target Caitlyn Clark. Knock her around. Intimidate her. Physically assault her. And the consequences will be 1 game. You'll miss 1 game of salary. You'll miss 1 opportunity to play. That's it. That's the price the league is setting on Caitlyn Clark's safety. And every player in the league hears that message. Every player understands that targeting Caitlyn Clark has minimal consequences. Every player gets a green light. Compare that to how the NBA handles their stars. When LeBron James takes a cheap shot, you see consequences. When Steph Curry gets hit inappropriately, you see the league respond. Teams are willing to get their coaches ejected defending their star players. Players are willing to get into altercations standing up for each other. Front offices are willing to issue statements and apply pressure to the league office. There's a culture in the NBA that says we protect our players, especially our stars. You take a cheap shot at our star and you're going to pay a price. You're going to get suspended. You're going to get fined. You're going to feel consequences. The entire system is designed to protect valuable assets from being targeted. The message from that system is, don't do this because it will cost you. The WNBA chose a different message. The WNBA said, go ahead and target our most valuable player because the consequences are minimal. The WNBA said, we care more about protecting our established players' feelings than we care about protecting our biggest star. The WNBA said, we're afraid of backlash from our player base, so we're not going to take real action. And that's cowardice. That's institutional cowardice. That's a league office that's aware of the problem, aware of the solution, and choosing not to implement it because they're afraid of the uncomfortable conversation that would have to happen. Because here's what would have to happen if the league actually wanted to stop the targeting. They would have to sit down with their player base and have a conversation about the resentment and the jealousy and the cultural conflict around Caitlin Clark. They would have to say to established players, your feelings about how much attention she's getting are valid, but targeting her physically is not going to be tolerated. They would have to set boundaries and enforce them. They would have to be willing to suspend popular players if necessary. They would have to make it clear that the league's values include protecting all players, not just the ones you like or agree with. They would have to take a stand and potentially face backlash from a significant portion of their player base. And the league office apparently wasn't willing to do that. They weren't willing to have that conversation. They weren't willing to take that stand. They weren't willing to face that potential backlash. So instead, they just didn't address it. They handed out a one-game suspension as a token gesture and hoped that would be enough to make the criticism go away. They hoped that people would stop paying attention to the physical targeting if they could claim they had taken action. They hoped that by doing the bare minimum, they could avoid the uncomfortable conversation. That's not leadership. That's not management. That's cowardice. The Indiana Fever organization has been equally cowardly. You have the player responsible for your franchise's resurgence. She's the reason your arena is full. She's the reason people care about the Fever. She's the reason your organization is relevant. She's the reason your team is making money. And when she's being physically targeted on national television, what's your response? Silence. No public statements. No pressure on the league office. No willingness to leverage your resources to protect your player. No willingness to eat fines for calling out the officiating. Just silence. The Fever have been completely silent while their most valuable asset is being pounded on the court. They've abandoned her. They've chosen to let the league handle it rather than standing up and saying this is not acceptable. That's a failure of leadership at the organizational level. A real franchise protecting a real asset would be doing everything in their power to make sure that player is protected. They would be issuing statements. They would be applying pressure to the league office. They would be standing up publicly and saying we will not tolerate our players being targeted. They would be making it clear that there are consequences within their organization for players who engage in that behavior. The Fever did none of that. The Fever essentially shrugged and said basketball's physical. That's not protecting your investment. That's abandonment. The referees, too, have had agency in this situation. They could have started calling every obvious foul that happens to Caitlin Clark with consistency. They could have made it clear to players that if you hit her, it's getting called. They could have enforced the rules equally and let the chips fall where they may. Instead, they've chosen to swallow their whistles. They've chosen to let obvious fouls go uncalled. They've chosen to protect players who target her by not calling the fouls that would punish those players. And that's a choice they're making every single game. At a certain point, you have to ask yourself if this is really about incompetence or if it's about something else. Can you really miss 17% of the flagrant fouls in an entire league going against one player by accident? Can you really be in a position where you're consistently not calling obvious fouls against the same player across different teams, different games, different referees? and have that be coincidence? Or is it a choice? Is it a message that the referees are sending? The most charitable interpretation is that the referees are afraid of the backlash from other players if they start calling fouls that protect Caitlin. The less charitable interpretation is that the league office has told them to let things play out physically. The least charitable interpretation is that they share the same resentment that some players have. We don't know which one it is. But we know the result. A player who accounts for 25% of the league's economic value is not being protected by the people whose job it is to protect all players equally. There's a moment when a story stops being about one league and starts being about something bigger. There's a moment when a domestic issue becomes an international issue. There's a moment when everyone realizes that this isn't just about basketball anymore. That moment came when Sky News Australia started running segments about WNBA officiating. Think about that for a second. An Australian news network, not a sports news network. A legitimate news network that covers news for Australian audiences. And they're doing segments about how the WNBA is officiating games and how a player is being targeted. They're showing montages of fouls on Caitlin Clark to an audience that probably couldn't name 5 other WNBA players. They're breaking down the play-by-play analysis of what constitutes appropriate physical play in professional women's basketball. That's not a good look for the WNBA. That's not something you want to see happen. When international news networks are covering the problems in your league's officiating, you have crossed over from having a public relations problem to having an actual problem. You don't have a messaging issue. You don't have a communication problem that can be solved with better press releases and more careful media appearances. You have a real, substantive problem that international journalists are looking at and saying this is wrong. This is not acceptable. This is something our audience needs to know about. The hosts on Sky News Australia weren't WNBA experts. They weren't people who spend their careers covering women's basketball. They were general news anchors who had never paid attention to the WNBA before. And they watched the montage of fouls on Caitlin Clark and came to the same conclusion that everyone else watching those clips comes to. This looks like assault, not basketball. This looks like a pattern of physical targeting. This looks like a player being hit in ways that go beyond what's acceptable even in a physical sport. You don't need to be a basketball expert to watch those clips and understand that something's wrong. A forearm to the throat of a player who's already on the ground isn't a basketball play. It's retaliation. It's intimidation. It's abuse. Fox News was running segments on player safety in the WNBA. Think about that headline for a second. Fox News, a major American news network. They're not usually in the business of covering women's sports, but they're covering this because there's a broader story here about American professional sports and how we handle our athletes. There's a story here about whether professional leagues are capable of enforcing basic safety standards. There's a story here about whether America is willing to tolerate what looks like assault on national television. And that story is big enough that it transcends the normal sports coverage and gets into actual news coverage. When you have both international media and domestic major news networks covering the same story, you have a moment of reckoning. You have a moment where your problems are being broadcast to much wider audiences than just basketball fans. You have a moment where people who have no interest in women's basketball are learning that there's a serious problem in women's basketball. And that's when you realize that ignoring the problem is not going to make it go away. You can't hope it disappears. You can't issue a one-game suspension and expect that to satisfy international journalists. You can't pretend this is just basketball drama when Sky News Australia is talking about it. The commentary from international media was consistent with the commentary from everyone else. This is a problem. This is a pattern. This player is being targeted. The referees are not protecting her. The league is not protecting her. This organization is falling apart at a moment when it should be at its strongest. And when that commentary is coming from outside the country, when that criticism is coming from journalists who have no stake in women's basketball, it carries a different kind of weight. It's not some bitter rival saying something. It's not a competitor with an axe to grind. It's an objective outsider looking at the situation and saying this is wrong. There was also a specific comment from one of the Australian news hosts about being able to recognize talent when she sees it, even if she's not an expert in women's basketball. And that's the thing about Caitlin Clark. You don't need to be a WNBA expert to understand that she's special. You don't need to have spent years watching women's basketball to recognize that she's an exceptional player who brings something different and exciting to the sport. Casual viewers can see it. International journalists can see it. People who have never cared about women's basketball before can see it. And when those people look at the montage of hits she's taking, they understand that something's wrong. They understand that a professional league should be protecting a player like that, not allowing her to be targeted. The Trump administration comment from the opening about an American athlete being assaulted on national television during an anniversary year for the country starts to make more sense when you realize how big this story has become. This isn't just a WNBA story anymore. This is a story about American professional sports. This is a story about what we're willing to tolerate. This is a story that's reaching international audiences and raising questions about how we handle our female athletes. And when that's the level of coverage you're getting, you can't just ignore it. You can't just hope it goes away. There's a moment that every referee has to face when they're working a game where obvious fouls are happening and they have to choose whether to call them or not. In professional sports, referees are responsible for enforcing the rules. That's their job. That's what they're paid to do. When a player commits a flagrant foul, the referee is supposed to call it. When a player commits an obvious foul, the referee is supposed to blow the whistle. That's the system. That's how the game is supposed to work. But in the case of Caitlin Clark, that system isn't working. Over and over again, obvious fouls are happening and the referees aren't calling them. And at a certain point, you have to ask yourself if that's incompetence or if that's a choice. You can forgive incompetence. People make mistakes. Referees can't see everything that happens on the court. There are 10 players moving at high speeds in a lot of directions. The action is happening fast. It's easy to miss things. It's easy to make mistakes. If a referee occasionally misses a foul, that's understandable. That's part of the game. That happens in every sport. But missing fouls consistently against the same player across different games, different teams, different referees. That's not incompetence anymore. That's a pattern. And patterns suggest something more intentional. When you pull back and look at the big picture, you're seeing referees from different crews, different referees who work different games, all consistently not calling fouls when Caitlin Clark gets hit. That doesn't happen by accident. That doesn't happen because they're all bad at their jobs. That happens because they're all making the same choice. The question is what that choice is based on. Are they choosing not to call fouls because they're afraid of the backlash from other players if they start protecting Caitlin? Are they choosing not to call fouls because the league office has quietly told them to let things play out physically? Are they choosing not to call fouls because they themselves resent Caitlin and want to see her taken down a notch? We don't know the answer, but we know that it's a choice. There's also the element of how these fouls would be called if they happened to anyone else. If LeBron James gets hit with a forearm to the throat, that's an automatic flagrant foul. If Steph Curry gets poked in the eye, that's an automatic technical foul at minimum. If any NBA player takes a hit like what Caitlin Clark is taking, there's an immediate response from the referees. The foul gets called. The player gets a technical. There are consequences. But in the WNBA, Caitlin Clark takes the exact same hits, and the referees don't call them. The refusal to call the fouls isn't about the nature of the fouls. It's about who the fouls are being committed against. This is where the pattern becomes really damning. If the referees were just bad at their jobs, you would expect them to be bad at their jobs equally against all players. You would expect them to miss fouls on everyone. But that's not what's happening. The referees are clearly capable of seeing fouls and calling them when they happen to other players. The issue is that they're specifically not calling them when they happen to Caitlin Clark. That suggests they're making a deliberate choice about when to apply the rules and when not to. And that's a fundamental failure of the system. The 17% statistic becomes even more damning when you think about it from a referee perspective. How would that number come to exist if the referees weren't making a choice about it? If flagrant fouls were being called at random or based on incompetence, the distribution would be much more even. You wouldn't see one player out of 144 absorbing nearly 1 out of every 5 flagrant fouls. That pattern only emerges if there's a systematic choice being made to call fouls one way against this one player and another way against everyone else. That's not incompetence. That's discrimination. Some people defend the referees by saying they're just letting the game play more physical when it comes to Caitlin Clark, because that's what the league office wants them to do. That the league office has told them to let things play out and not interfere. That interpretation actually makes the problem worse, not better, because it means the league office is complicit in the failure to protect her. It means that the physical targeting isn't just a result of player resentment and referee incompetence, but also league office direction. It means that somewhere at the top of the WNBA, someone made a decision that Caitlin Clark was not going to be protected equally, that she was going to be allowed to be targeted, that the rules would be applied differently in games involving her. The whole system is designed to protect players. That's the whole point of having referees and having rules and having fouls and having suspensions. The system is supposed to protect everyone equally so that players can play hard without being afraid of getting seriously injured. But when you have a player who's being targeted with physical hits that get called as flagrant fouls at 17% of the rate for the entire league, the system has failed. The system is broken. The system is not protecting that player, and the referees are a huge part of why the system is broken. We're at a crossroads. The WNBA got everything they ever wanted. They got the player who could make women's basketball relevant. They got the star who could move the needle on television ratings. They got the mainstream appeal that had eluded them for 25 years. They got lucky in a way that most leagues don't get lucky. They won the lottery, and now they're in the process of squandering it. They're watching their golden goose get targeted, and they're doing minimal things to stop it. The really frustrating thing is that this didn't have to happen. This could have been different. The league could have chosen to protect Caitlin Clark aggressively. They could have chosen to come down hard on targeting. They could have chosen to have difficult conversations with their player base about culture and jealousy and resentment. They could have chosen to evolve while respecting their history. They could have chosen to be a league that protects all of its players equally. They could have chosen a lot of things that would have created a better environment and a stronger league. Instead, they chose cowardice. They chose silence. They chose to let the cultural conflict play out through physical targeting while doing minimal things to stop it. They chose to gamble that Caitlin Clark would stay despite being mistreated. They chose to hope that the problem would disappear if they ignored it long enough. And every single day they make those choices, they're pushing a talented player closer to the door. At some point, Caitlin Clark is going to look at her options and ask herself whether staying in Indianapolis is worth it. She's going to think about playing overseas where she'd make more money and be treated better. She's going to think about media opportunities that might pay more than basketball. She's going to think about leveraging her popularity in ways that don't involve being physically targeted by your peers. And when that moment comes, when she decides it's not worth it, the WNBA is going to realize that they had the power to prevent this outcome, but chose not to use it. The international media coverage is already painting a picture of a league that's failing its players. Sky News Australia is already asking questions about WNBA officiating. Fox News is already covering player safety issues. The world is already starting to understand that something's wrong here. And that's going to have long-term consequences for how women's basketball is perceived globally. That's going to shape whether international players want to come play in the WNBA. That's going to shape whether sponsors want to invest. That's going to shape how the league is viewed. The pettiness of leaving her off the anniversary poster is going to stick with people. The fact that the league couldn't even give her credit for growth she directly created is going to become part of the narrative. The one-game suspensions for flagrant fouls are going to stick with people. The fact that a forearm to the throat only gets you 1 game is going to seem inadequate to anyone watching. The silence from the fever is going to stick with people. The fact that a franchise can stay silent while their most valuable player is being targeted is going to be seen as a failure of leadership. When Caitlin Clark eventually leaves, and if things continue on this trajectory, she will leave. The WNBA is going to spend years wondering what they did wrong. They're going to look back at this moment and understand that they had the power to create a different outcome. They had the power to protect their asset. They had the power to create a league culture that was inclusive and protective. They had the power to have difficult conversations about jealousy and resentment. They had the power to be different. And they chose not to use that power. The question for the WNBA isn't whether they can win a championship. The question is whether they can keep their biggest star. That's the real battle right now. That's the real test of whether the league has what it takes to survive and grow. And right now, based on their actions and their silence and their minimal responses, it looks like they're going to fail that test. It looks like they're going to choose pride over future. It looks like they're going to choose protecting the feelings of their established players over protecting their most valuable asset. And that's tragic because women's basketball didn't have to be that way. Women's basketball could have evolved into something better. Women's basketball could have figured out how to be inclusive and respectful of its history while also welcoming new players and new energy. Women's basketball could have been a league where everyone thrived. But instead, it's becoming a league defined by jealousy and targeting and institutional cowardice. The camera is going to keep rolling. The fouls are going to keep happening. The referees are going to keep not calling them. The suspensions are going to keep being minimal. The league office is going to keep doing nothing meaningful. The Fever are going to keep staying silent. And every single day that goes by, Caitlin Clark is going to get closer to making a decision that's going to cost the WNBA everything they've built. That's where we are right now. That's the moment we're living through. The WNBA has to understand what's at stake and act accordingly. Because if they don't, they're going to wish they had. They're going to spend the next decade regretting the choices they made right now. And by then, it's going to be too late to fix it.